It's from Hans Kung, said, "There will be no peace among the nations without peace among the religions." And then he went on to say, "There will be no peace among the religions without dialogue among the religions." We need to sit down and talk to each other. We need to sit across the table as brothers and sisters, as visionaries, as bridge builders, facing in the direction of what is possible. Yes? Imagining a world that can be. This is the month, the basis for the entire month of April, so I hope you will be here for the entire month. I'm here with two of my favorite friends. My friend Iraj Kodadust we meet at least once a month, sometimes twice a month, to sit across the table and vision the world that is possible. His world is Baha'i. My world is unity. Yet we find when we compare notes, we're facing the same direction, and we're sharing the same ideas with different words. Far left is Dr. Greg Raduca, who's a member of Unity North, but also a Sufi, has studied intensively the Sufi tradition. And we're going to share some poetry. All three of us love poetry and music. And so to start our dialogue, we're going to begin with some poetry and then a song.
This poem from Rumi, the 13th century Persian poet and philosopher and Sufi. What is to be done, O people? For I do not recognize myself. I'm neither Christian or Jew, Gab, Hindu, Buddhist, or Muslim. I'm not from the East or from the West. I'm not from the North or from the South. I'm not from this country or that country. I'm not of nature's mint or circling heavens. My place is the placeless. My trace is the traceless. It is neither body or soul, for I belong to the soul of the beloved. I have put duality aside. I have seen that the two worlds are one. One I seek, one I see, one I know, one I call.
From another Sufi poet, Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi, a garden amidst the flames. Amazing, a garden in the midst of the flames. My heart takes on the form of what it entertains. A meadow for gazelles, a Christian hermitage, a pagan pagoda in the Hajj pilgrimage. It's the writ of the Torah and the Holy Quran. Love's faith is the path I'm meant to travel on. Down whichsoever path love's dromedaries speed, there's my religion. I bless that blessed creed.
Millions of stars placed in the sky by one God. Millions on earth lift up their eyes to one God. So many children looking to God by many a different name. One Spirit, loving each the same. Many the ways all of us pray to one God. Many the paths winding their way to one God. Sisters and brothers, there were no strangers after God's work was done. For your God and my God are one God. Yes, children, your God and my God are one. A Muslim dignitary once confronted Rumi before a large audience. And the critic said, "You claim to be one with 72 religious sects." And he said, "How can that be? The Jews cannot agree with the Christians. The Christians cannot agree with the Muslims, and so on and so forth. If they cannot agree with each other, how can you agree with each of them?" And Rumi thought for a second and said, yes, you are right. I agree with you too. Another Rumi story, and then we'll get into our doctrine. 4 travelers, a Persian, a Turk, an Arab, and a Greek, were on a journey, and hunger overcame them. They each only had between them, all 4, 1 coin. And they began to passionately argue about how to spend that 1 coin. Each one wanted to buy grapes, but kept referring to the fruit in their own language, causing a passionate disagreement. They wanted the same thing, yet were using different words to describe it. A linguist happened to be passing by and heard their argument. He understood the problem, and he asked the men to give him the coin so that he could satisfy their hunger and their desires. Taking the coin, the linguist went to a fruit shop, bought 4 bunches of grapes, and gave 1 to each of the 4 men. It was then that the 4 began to realize and wake up. They were arguing over the same thing, but had been unable to understand the others. Those who seek to understand will find understanding. Those that seek to argue because of language barriers, cultural barriers, and religious barriers will never find understanding. Thus, we kick off a dialogue and we share grapes with the entire universe today. Yes? We're going to take a moment to just lay out the tenets of our various faith traditions. And I invite you to pay careful attention to how the grapes are the grapes are the grapes are the grapes. In the unity tradition, we have 5 basic unity tenets. The first is there is only one power and one presence. It is good, it is God. Everywhere you look, you see, you feel, you know, and you experience has that spark of God there present. There's not another energy. We got rid of the devil years ago. There's not an energy working against God. It's all the energy of God as love, as peace, and harmony. We're either finding it or we're missing it. We're either awake to it or we're asleep. The second tenet, if there is only one, that means every person on the planet has that spark of divinity within them. It's known by many names. In unity, we call it the Christ. You can call it the Tao, the Atman. You can call it the light. You can call it Fred if you want. But it's the same light that exists at the point of every heart and every soul and every religion. Our third unity tenet is that we use our thoughts, the gifts of God, our ability to think, our feelings, our ability to feel, and our ability to use our body in action. Our thoughts and our feelings and actions are creating the world we live in. We're either in cooperation with truth and oneness, or we're fighting against the current and suffering. So we have been given the gift of thought, feeling, and action to make heaven or hell on earth. Which one are you creating? We are that powerful. The fourth unity tenet, and it's germane to all the religious worlds, all the religious path, Meditation and prayer. Get quiet. Get still. Remember the truth of your oneness with God, and then think from that place. Remember your oneness with all creation, all people, and God, and from that place you feel. And then that place you act. And then our fifth unity principle, which is my favorite of the five, because the rest is all theology. Get busy using your body. The truth that you know is the truth that you demonstrate. The truth that you know is the truth that you sit with brothers and sisters and have dialogue and realize we belong to each other. These five principles inform the entire unity doctrine. It is our foundation, and it is important. I'm going to turn the mic over now to my friend Iraj to talk about Baha'ism.
Okay, well, it could be a repeat of some of the things you said, because the main tenets of all religions, of all major religions, are fundamentally one and the same. Baha'i faith also starts with the fact that there is one God, the Creator, whose essence is unknowable, but we know Him through the attributes, which is all goodness, charity and goodness and kindness and compassion and all the rest. And so if there's one God, and the second one we need to reflect upon, is that he says there's also one religion, which has come through man through time. He calls it progressive revelations. As we develop, as we advance, then God reveals himself again to repeat the same basic tenets, but also to modify those, what he calls social teachings, according to the needs of the time. So there's one God, there's one religion, and so if there's one God and one religion, he says there's also one race, the human race. And ultimately, we have to put aside all these divisions that separates us, even separation of nations. In the words of Baha'u'llah, the founder of Baha'i, this span of the earth is one country, and mankind its citizens. Ultimately, the vision of the Baha'i faith is that the world will become like the United States, which means rather than the middle of last century where the Baha'i faith began, you had the Civil War. All the states fighting one another, they finally came together as one nation. This is the way the world will become. We won't have to spend trillions upon trillions on ammunitions. We need to have police force. We need to have governments, but like the States and United States. So that would be the vision of future. So one God, one religion, one humanity. The Baha'i faith began in mid-19th century. And do you know that all religions are waiting for a Messiah? And that was the peak of the time that they're waiting for that Messiah. Hindus called him the coming back of Krishna. Buddhists, coming of fifth Buddha. Zoroastrians, the coming of Shah Bahram. Jews, the coming of the Lord of Hosts. Christians, return of Jesus in the glory of the Father. Muslims also are awaiting the return of Jesus, and so on. So all of them are waiting for some kind of return. And Baha'i faith that there's one return, it's all one and the same. And all these denominations, I hear 30,000 in Christianity, 72,600 at least in Islam, and so on, that those are all man-made, and those are not the purpose of religion. Those are disunifying aspects that God himself unifies. And ultimately, if you understand one God, one religion, one humanity, then the promise of Jesus and all these other prophets would be fulfilled. And what is that promise? Peace on earth as it is in heaven.
Let's say that together. Peace on earth as it is in heaven.
Just want to thank Richard for that very, very beautiful song, and thank Chelsea so much. Wherever John is, I'm sure he loved that version, so thank you. I've been a Sufi since 1972, was initiated into what's called a universal Sufi order, and a universal Sufi order is about what you've heard Richard and Iraj talking about, honoring all paths to God. And it's what, to me, unity is so much about, and that's why I love unity so much. Thich Nhat Hanh talked about the various religions as a fruit salad. And blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, apples, pears. And if you throw away one of those religions, you miss the wonderful, delicious nature of a fruit salad. So, and Thich Nhat Hanh, of course, was a Buddhist. My root teacher is Hazrat Inayat Khan. It's my most important teacher. Brought Sufism to the U.S. first in 1910. And as a universal Sufi, I identify myself as a Christian and a Jew and a Muslim and a Hindu and a Buddhist and the rest that we're talking about. Sufism, particularly in the Middle East, is the mystical form of Islam, which is can be very different from other forms of Islam. And the very last thing that any Sufi would do is participate in an act of terrorism or an act of persecution toward another faith. In fact, one of my Sufi teachers is involved in peace efforts in Palestine and in Israel. A Sufi has been a former Secretary General of the United Nations. And Sufism isn't always necessarily something exotic and out of this world. In fact, Sufis very much are in the world, but not of it. For example, the president of the International Monetary Fund, past president, has been a Sufi. So very, very involved in the goings-on of this world in one guise or another. And you might not ever be able to tell that a person was a Sufi unless you found out more about that. So Sufis believe that all the major religious paths meet each other at the mountaintop, at the summit, and that's the place where all of the paths disappear into the center of being, which is in all of us and in everything. The Sufis don't have any particular doctrines, don't have any particular dogma. It's all about the experience. And particularly the experience of love and opening the heart. You hear so much in Sufi poetry about love, lover, and beloved. Ishqallah, mabudlillah is how they say it. And it's so much of a path with heart and a path that's walked with love. The lover not only communicates with God, but unites with her, or him, as you will. Sufi honors all great religions of the world, as I mentioned, but they also see the religions as a shade which covers the light that might blind the eyes of souls that are still awakening. In every age, some form of shade or covering of that light has been necessary, and it's also necessary today. The shades of religions may vary in form and color and size, but the light that they cover is always one, without a second, eternal as the heavens, from everlasting to everlasting. And that's one of the things I love about unity so much, is that we emphasize that light. Jesus said, love your friend and even love your enemy. And the Sufi treads that same path in the charity of heart to one's neighbors, as has been said earlier from the podium today in the CARES ministry, in showing love to each other and showing love to ourselves, which is so very important and that Richard emphasizes time and again. That's what we consider the love of God. There's a story, another Sufi story that I love, about the story of the boatman, and some of you may have heard it, where a scholar is taking a boat across a lake, and he's talking to the boatman, and he notices that the boatman is not using the best form of grammar. And so the scholar says, haven't you ever studied grammar? And the boatman says, no. Well, then a quarter of your life has been wasted. And they continue across the lake, and And the scholar says, well, have you ever studied Latin? And the boatman says, no. And then the scholar says, well, half your life has been wasted. And then a sudden storm comes up over this huge lake, and the waves really begin to tumble and rock and roll. And so the boatman says, did you ever learn to swim? And the scholar says, no. And he says, well then, all your life has been wasted. So Sufism is about learning to swim.
I'd just like to add that in order to get to that oneness, what Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, recommends, is first and foremost what he calls independent, unfettered search for truth. Saying that if all of us search for truth in anything is one, we all come to the same conclusion. But in order to search for truth, he says that one of the prerequisites is to understand that science and religion should be in harmony. If you are learning religion in such a way to believe in a lot of unbelievables that I don't need to repeat, those unbelievables were stories. They're not the real truth. So put aside prejudices, superstitions, unfounded dogmas, and the things that science cannot prove, and bring science and religion together, and that will be the beginning of true search for truth, and that will be the beginning of the oneness of humanity.
One of the things that when Iraj and I meet, and it always makes me laugh, they talk about the independent search for truth. You know, Unity students are eternal cynics. They're like, I'm not going to take your word for it. You don't take anybody's word who happens to be up here for it. You go implement the truths in your life and find God for yourself. Find the principles for yourself. We think unique to us, but no, it is happening everywhere. We are encouraged by the spiritual leaders to find truth. I'm going to ask a few questions of my colleagues here, but Greg referred to Jesus when he said, love your enemies. And at Unity, we like to carry that a step further, that you have no enemies. We like to take the unconditional love, the vibration of love itself, and to realize that we have no enemies. Yes, certainly in the physical world we do, but when we elevate the vibration to the place of spiritual truth, there are no enemies, and that's what the world needs to save the world. And both the Baha'is and the Sufis have been subjugated, have been put to death for their belief system. Yet, like the Dalai Lama has done, and the people of Tibet, that refused to hate the Chinese when they had been driven out of their country, I have found in both the Sufi and the Baha'i tradition that they refuse to have an enemy. They refuse to talk poorly and badly about those who have actually put family members. I know that Iraj has had family members put to death in the name of them following the Baha'i tradition. And so my question to you, to both of you, and to all of us sitting here today, how do you as a student of spirituality deal with what the world would call violent and destructive behaviors, especially when it lands on your front door?
First and foremost, we're all responsible for one life and one life only, first and foremost, and that's ourselves. Which means, can I change myself? Through prayers, meditation, godly living, helping others, and not seeing anybody as my enemy. Even as Richard mentioned,
it sounds like unity.
Yes, essence of it is one and the same. Over 20,000 Baha'is so far have been put to death, and thousands upon thousands of them are in jail in Iran, where it started, for promoting these principles. So it starts with ourselves, and if we change ourselves, and if we see that we don't have any enemy, and even those who consider themselves our enemy, they are misguided. We should help them the best we can, even if it means to give up your own life. So that's the path that Baha'i suggests.
With the Sufi, we always look at trying to come to a truce with the war with ourselves, because unless we're dealing with our own shadow, there's a real opportunity or chance to project that shadow onto the world. And so I think it's always important if you're going to try to make peace in the world, to find peace within oneself. Also, the Sufi is very active in the world. As I mentioned, there aren't any, not to put down being a monk or being a nun, that can be very wonderful, but there are no Sufi monks and nuns, and one of the reasons is to be very much in the world but not of it. So Sufis have engaged very actively, and for example, one of the Sufi teachers of mine is engaged in peace efforts in Israel and Palestine right now, trying to seek unity among the three major religions there, and in community dinners, in conferences and things like that. It's such a difficult task, and I couldn't begin to imagine what all that would entail, being over in that part of the world right now. But it's definitely a seeking of peace between the different religions, which has accounted for so many of the wars. Religions have accounted for so many of the wars over through the centuries.
Often we hear in unity, as within, so without. As it is within, it will be in the world. Because as we are thinking and feeling and holding and in the inside, in the level of our soul, it will manifest in the manifest realm, in the world before us. And again, Greg quoted Jesus, in the world but not of the world. And that's what the Unity student would do. We're having a human experience. We don't deny the human experience. There are things that are difficult, dark, and painful. Yet our job as Unity students is to raise above the human experience, to not be defined by it, to not be defined by the violence, to not be defined by the darkness, understanding and knowing that love is more powerful than the darkness. Love is more powerful, and there are those that would say, you're a Pollyanna. You have to fight fire with fire, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which leaves us all blind and toothless. Unity says, and isn't it wonderful to hear that we're not the only ones saying that love is more powerful? And I see in my colleagues, in their faith, in their brothers and sisters and their families, that love is still being subjugated, still being put down. But when we join together, we're a stronger force for love's presence on the earth, yes? That I can face my darkness, my individual darkness at the level of my own family when we join together. And where two or more are gathered in the name of truth, love will have its way. It's just a matter of the collective raising, the collective vibration of thought when religions come together. People and brothers and sisters come together and we go, we will not waver. We will not waffle from love's presence in the world, knowing with hope. And I have to say, Raj, when we talk some days, it's really hard for me. I look at the news and I'm on my knees going, is there any hope? And my friend, who is several years my senior, is always the banner of hope, always the one that says, don't give up, because we need each other. We need each other, not only in this room, but we need each other with churches and synagogues and mosques and temples, and the Baha'is meet in homes. We need those homes also as part of the turning this boat around, that love will have its way. And it gives me hope that even in our narrow little field, there are people in their narrow field that are doing the same work. And dialogues are going to bring us together. Can we change the political environment of the country today? You better believe we can. But we got to start talking to each other as people of light, as people of love, and as people who are willing to put a hand down and say, we're in this together. My next question for my colleagues is, what does your faith teach about service to humanity? Our fifth unity principle is talk is cheap. What are you doing? What are you doing to make the world a better place? You know, somebody once said, it was a Jewish rabbi, if your church burned down tomorrow, would anybody care outside of your community? And if the answer is no, then you're not doing your work. So what are you doing to push the doors open to the love that we have in this room, to be out present with your brothers and your sisters that are in need? So my question is, what does your faith teach about service to the human race?
From the Baha'i perspective, if religion is only words, and we go to church and synagogue and sit there, and some of us becomes monks and spend our time full time, 24 hours a day in those areas, that is not of enough use. We need to go to the world and we need to serve mankind, to the best of our abilities through our profession, through our work, through service, through giving, and compassion. And also, again, one of the principles of the Baha'i faith is finding ways of abolishing extremes of wealth and poverty. From the Baha'i perspective, it's not right for 20, 25 people in this country to sit on trillions or billions, and then we have 40 million people in this country alone who are dying of hunger. So some, not equality, but equity should be created through any means and all means possible.
Yeah, Sufis also believe that service is so central. In Hinduism, it's called karma yoga, and sometimes karma yoga gets a rough rap. Well, it's not as important as Raja Yoga and the meditation and all this. But I really do think, and so many Sufis believe also, that service on a day-to-day basis to our fellow man and woman is the most important piece of the spiritual path. If the spiritual path lacks service, then to me, it's really not an authentic spiritual path. The reason that Tibetan Buddhists, for example, get enlightened, and Tibetan Buddhists are teachers to a lot of the Sufi leaders in the United States in particular, if the reason for enlightenment is not better service to others, then it's a really hollow form of enlightenment. So the best motivation for one's own growth is so that one can be more loving of others, be of more service to others.
So the question we asked today, go ahead and applaud. This is good stuff to applaud. What are we doing to make the world heaven on earth? What are we thinking? What are we feeling? And what are we doing to create oneness?